Hello, I'm Waqar Rizvi, and this is Scope. Just as we're coming to air now, we've gotten news that India's COVID cases have now passed the 400,000 mark. And in fact, we're going to be discussing that very disturbing news in the first segment of today's show. What's been happening in India, of course, has worried much of the world, as we've seen over the past 10 consecutive days or so, with numbers increasing at an alarming rate, as the country also suffers a new variant of the coronavirus pandemic and the coronavirus itself. There are concerns about possible mismanagement of this, the fact that large gatherings of different sorts were allowed to have taken place in the country. We know that oxygen in many places has already run out and or is extremely expensive or hard to get to. So the concerns are varied, of course. There is also concern about even access to vaccines at this time, considering, I believe, if I'm not mistaken, around 2% of the population has so far been vaccinated as well. So it's a compound number of issues which has come together to create the perfect storm for this current wave that India is going through. Let's discuss all of those issues a bit further. We're now joined by Ravi Srivastav, who is a political analyst who is joining us today from Delhi. Also joining us from Delhi is Ashok, Wankhede, who is a journalist, columnist, and political analyst. Ashok and Ravi, thank you both for taking your time out to join us today. Ravi, let me start with you. What do you make of the fact that we are now past 400,000 new cases in the country? This is disturbing, isn't it, as a milestone? What went wrong, do you think?
Mr. Rizvi, I would say that the first round of corona pandemic in India was almost a natural disaster kind of a thing. And we were just caught off guard and some casualties. The pandemic numbers went up. It spread into number of major cities, etc. That all happened. It peaked in the month of September, from which it was declining. But I will say that second wave of corona pandemic is a man-made disaster, in the sense the government did not learn any lessons from the first wave, and there was no preparedness when the second wave came. As a result, what you have mentioned in your opening address, that there is a shortage of the critical medicine, remdesivir. There is a shortage of oxygen. There are no beds. There are no ventilators. There are the people are suffering. People are dying. Some are on the roads. The government is concealing the data. The government is not giving the actual number of casualties. Many states are concealing and hiding the data because they are afraid that this will go against their performance and all. So this is a precarious situation.
Yeah.
Especially Delhi is extremely bad. Delhi, there is a severe oxygen shortage, and today only, I think, for 1 hour the oxygen went off at Batra hospital and 8 people lost their lives. It is a major capital city, so we know more as far as such things are happening across the country, which are going unreported or unknown. Yeah.
Yeah, Ashok, what is your understanding of the situation and what went wrong?
The basic problem is that after the first wave of the corona-19, the virus was altogether different, and we did manage to fight it off to a great extent because of the lockdown. We had a continuous lockdown for almost 2 to 3 months, and then the geographical location of all the Asian countries, even Pakistan also did well because of the abundant sun we had, the life of the habits of eating habits and other things had saved us from the first wave. But after the war of the first wave, or the government and the entire nation started celebrating as if we won the war against the COVID. That was the biggest problem. The fraternity, the scientists, the doctors were warning for the second wave. But we thought, since we fought first wave very well, second wave we will be able to fight it off just like the first one. But the second wave the virus came with a double mutation, and that is the basically you find in only India. That is known as the Indian variant now. The first we thought of some African variant will come, we thought of something from Europe, but the double mutant virus, this virus is hardly giving any time for a treatment also. So there is a huge rush. Previously, you have a 14 days time for a treatment. Now the second virus is hardly you get infected, you go to the hospital, you need oxygen very next day, and then immediately by third or fourth day, if the care is not taken, the oxygen or the medicine is not being delivered, you are dead. That is the problem. So then the country realized that we need to go for oxygen. We were having abundant oxygen, we were exporting oxygen. We never thought that when we have a problem of oxygen, the major logistic, there will be a logistic failure of having cryogenic tankers and the cylinders of oxygen, which we are shortage with. Yeah. Now, today only the High Court has passed an order warning the central government if the oxygen is not supplied to Delhi as per their demand, the High Court, the central government may be ready to face the contempt of court. That was what the order recently, 2 hours before being passed by the High Court. So there was a mismanagement. Rather, it was miscalculated by the authorities or the central government that they thought the way they fought first, we will fight it second. So
if I may come in, Ashok, I do apologize for cutting you off, but I wanted to just continue the conversation, bring Ravi back into it. Ravi, it's one thing to say that, fine, there was a miscalculation before this current wave of coronavirus in the country, but then now during this wave and during this oxygen shortage, do you think that authorities have been able to correct their mistakes of the past?
On the contrary, Rizvi, there is a kind of arrogance and denial in the present ruling government. The first thing is the entire healthcare infrastructure of India has crumbled and at the verge of collapse everywhere. You know, the number of beds, the oxygen, the medicine, the care, and nothing is available. And you know the problem, what Ashok has rightly said, that India started celebrating in the month of January and February. The Prime Minister of the country, the Home Minister of the country, were at the top of their voice were saying, we have won the war and it's over and etc., etc. Instead of arranging the next in the infrastructure for the second wave and all that. Now, the only silver lining in the whole system is that India's 12% population is vaccine already. People have got, the elderly people above 45 have got at least 2 rounds of vaccines, which is a saving grace. But still, what Ashok has said, this virus is very, very, aggressive. And aggressive in the sense it hardly gives any time for the treatment and all. And that's why India's requirement for the oxygen was hardly 6,000 metric ton in a day. So now it has exceeded to 9,000 metric tons. Now arranging 3,000 metric tons suddenly is a challenge. The resources are available. The whole world has come to the support of India. That's a very good thing. 40 nations have extended their support. But it's a gross failure on the part of the government, which did not improve their healthcare infrastructure, did not build up the hospitals, did not make that, medicines are sold in black. The people are forced to buy the cylinders by giving deposits, some 20,000, 30,000 rupees. And people are sitting on the road and using the oxygen. I mean, there are no beds available. It's not that it has happened in India only. This has happened in European Union, also in several countries. But then here it was, it was well known that this will happen, and we did not prepare for it. That's a sad thing. So loss of lives.
Indeed. Ashok, I wanted to ask, go back to that same point. I mean, at this time, it seems that the government is not even giving us an exact number of actually how many people are dying, actually how many people are infected with the virus, right? Because there's an argument on the part of scientists that the numbers that are coming out are not, in fact, the complete picture. And at the same time, there's also an argument about when the government knew that this new variant of the virus was already in the country and was already spreading amongst the people. So my question again remains that if a mistake was made in the past, why isn't the government correcting it now?
things are so much messed up. I don't think that anybody will be able to correct it. How do you correct it? You have oxygen. You have oxygen. You get oxygen bulk from Middle East. You have oxygen coming from neighboring countries, but it has to reach to the hospital. You need to have the cryogenic tankers. We need to have the cylinders, oxygen cylinders. The direct tanker cannot fit the hospital. That's the problem. So the logistic at a micro level has been failed very badly. The worst part of it, when the second variant erupted in Maharashtra, the Mumbai, basically the commercial capital of the country, when the Maharashtra was going on a peak and increasing lot many cases and death numbers, the entire government machinery was abusing Maharashtra government due to political differences with the state government there. And at the same time, we had the elections in 5 states. Huge rallies were addressed. We had the very big event called Kumbh, where 37, 40 lakh people gathered together. And nobody bothered to stop those things because they were abusing a government in Maharashtra which was not politically suiting them. So it was basically a political game government thought to be. They thought it is best way to make a dent in the Maharashtra government. But basically they made the dent in the health of the country. That is the problem. Now what logistic? Only now it will be a funny to even think of. The oxygen tankers are being loaded into Air Force planes, and then planes are sortie from the plant to the cities.
Yeah.
Because you cannot waste the time for a tanker to travel on the road. Things have gone to that level.
Yeah.
Exactly what Raviji has said. It is you can't imagine the big hospital, one of the biggest hospitals in Delhi, saying that we have oxygen for 2 hours. Now for 1 hour, for half an hour. And the entire, all the patients are just waiting. They know that their death is knocking their door.
Yeah.
In any time they can die. Immediately there is a relief tanker came. Oh, now we will be having oxygen and another oxygen for a day. Now that entire failure, it is a planning, the disaster management has disastrously failed. And what I can say is, what Ravi is exactly, because they know. The problem is that the government is so egoistic.
I do apologize for cutting short. We're quickly running out of time. So Ravi, I wanted to give you the final word before I let both of you go. What kind of a political impact will all of this have once we are past this wave, hopefully soon? What lessons need to be learned?
First thing is the government has lost its credibility completely. People have lost faith in the healthcare system, in the ruling government, who has been only issuing the circulars and circulars. They were only giving, counter circulars by the state governments, which have not worked, and people continue to suffer. So I think this present dispensation in India has been completely discredited, and I think this will reflect in the forthcoming days in the future. I think in the elections or other things, that this particular dispensation need to be moved out, because they hardly could save any lives. They could not do anything, and it was all band-aid solutions, all crisis management, all firefighting. There was no structural changes in the system here. As a result, the Indians suffered most. And the people are really frustrated and angered across the cities, major cities, villages in the world, in India at the moment. So I think unless the government changes its attitude and the government gives a hand holding with all states, irrespective of their ruling party and all, and rise above the party lines and give a full support to all the states and fight as a united force, only then something can be salvaged. Otherwise, the nation has lost it.
Very well. We'll leave there as a final word, but we really appreciate both Ravi and Ashok for taking their time out, speaking to us, both of them from Delhi. They're both political analysts. We were discussing the situation in India, which becomes more and more harrowing on a daily basis as the world watches in horror, as well as, of course, not just the fact that there's a shortage of oxygen, but just the horror that the Indian people are suffering through. 400,000 is not a number to be proud of the number of viruses that have now, been hit. That milestone has been hit in the country. It's only the third country, I believe, in the world to hit that milestone, unfortunately. A lot of countries have offered help, as one of our guests alluded to as well. Nevertheless, it does go down to management of some sort within the country, right? So even if oxygen were to appear at an airport, there's concerns about how that would be even transported to the respective hospitals or even bedsides that they are needed at. All of this creating this perfect storm, and hopefully, we all hope with bated breath that India can come out of this as unscathed as possible at this time. I'll be back with my next segment after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here on Scope with me, Waqar, Rizvi. In this segment, we're going to discuss the Palestinian elections, which, as the Palestinian leadership has announced, have now been postponed. Those elections were set to take place in the West Bank and Gaza. These are more of the parliamentary elections. And of course, this is being done because Mahmoud Abbas has said that he did not want voters in Jerusalem to be blocked from access to polls, something that Israel had not clarified, at least in Mahmoud Abbas's own words, considering the fact that Israel is having its own political upheaval at the moment. On the other side, of course, the likes of Hamas and others are saying this is in fact another power grab, in a sense, or a coup by Mahmoud Abbas. We know that he's been leading essentially by decree for the past 10 years or so. Back in 2006, Hamas had won elections, but at that time, the Americans as well as the Israelis did not accept, in fact, those results, and then we had that entire situation that we now have take place between the West Bank and Gaza, especially Gaza being essentially cut off completely from the outside world by both an Egyptian as well as Israeli blockade of that coastal enclave. What does this mean for Mahmoud Abbas himself? I mean, there are divisions within the Fatah party also, which are playing into this, and him feeling weak going into these polls. Is that what's actually happening behind the scenes, instead of actually concerns about voters in Jerusalem? Let's put all those concerns and issues to our panelists who are joining us today. We're now joined by Daoud Kuttab, who is a journalist, and he's part of the Community Media Network Director. He is joining us today from Amman. Joining us today from London is Yousef Helou, who is a political analyst and journalist. Yousef and Daoud, thank you both for taking your time out to join us today. Daoud, let me start with you. What do you think is actually happening here behind the scenes? Is it, as Mahmoud Abbas says, concerns about voters in Jerusalem?
Unfortunately, I don't think it's only about Jerusalem. Obviously, Jerusalem is an important issue that everybody's concerned about. But I think the issue here is more of trying to engineer the results of the elections to fit a particular narrow point of view, which is the point of view of Mr. Abbas's own party and his own presidency. And I think that's the interference in the results of the elections, which Mahmoud Abbas promised that he will not do. So it's a very complicated situation. Obviously, the issue of Jerusalem is important, and people say that we should still call for elections in Jerusalem and challenge the Israelis and make it a part of the struggle to vote and to participate in the campaigning in Jerusalem, because already we have the nominees from Jerusalem on the slate. So that, there's three parts to the elections in Jerusalem: the nominations, the voting, and the campaigning. Well, at least the nominations for people from Jerusalem is on board. The campaigning, I think, will be done in the streets and on social media and everywhere else. Even if the Israelis try to stop it, it will still happen. In fact, every time the Israelis will stop somebody, they will become more popular. So I don't think that's going to affect their campaigning. The big issue is voting, and that is divided into two parts. The majority of the people will vote on the Palestinian polling booths just outside the borders of East Jerusalem. Mm-hmm. But according to the Oslo Agreement, about 6,000 people are allowed to vote absentee using post office boxes. And that's basically where the big argument is, whether the Israelis would allow that or not, and whether Palestinians should allow the Israeli meddling into the Palestinian elections to be the reason to cancel the entire election system. That's where the discussion is today.
So what are your thoughts about Hamas saying this is a coup? I mean, is this as simple as that? Is this as simple as trying to prevent, for example, Hamas from getting an upper hand if it were to gain an upper hand in polls?
Well, although insisting that Palestinians in Jerusalem should take part in the elections, postponing the elections was a total disappointment and a setback. Demonstrators took to the streets across the Gaza Strip, which has been ruled by Hamas for the past 12, 13 years, to protest against this decision. It's a long overdue that elections should take place across the Palestinian territories. No one is legal. President Abbas has lost his presidency term a long time ago. But I think the main reason behind postponing the elections is that there is a big worry on part of the Palestinian Authority that Hamas might win the elections again. And also this was echoed by a number of Israeli officials who released these analysis saying that it's not to do with Jerusalemites to take part in the elections, but also a number of Arab countries are worried that the Muslim Brotherhood or Hamas might take the lead again. But overall, it's not surprising anymore because there is a deep gap between the two main rival factions, Fatah and Hamas. There is lack of trust between these two main parties, and it seems that the Palestinian Authority is dominating the scene.
Daoud, is this in some ways an effort, I would think it is, in fact, an effort to avoid what happened in 2006 with the Hamas win then? And why then even hold the elections altogether? Why even call for elections? Why go through this entire charade if there was a fear of, if there was a desire on the part of everybody, i.e. in the Palestinian leadership, to not have Hamas win? I mean, Hamas is, whether we like it or not, a political party. It should have an equal, opportunity to win elections and hold leadership positions, shouldn't it?
Their election law was changed in 2007. So instead of having both the national and local elections, this is national elections that are based on the proportional representation. Most polls say that no single party, whether it's Fatah, Hamas, or the left wing or any other group, is going to win outright the entire election. So the fact is that nobody's going to win, and therefore there has to be a coalition created. So this is number one. Number two, the Hamas has already said they are not going to challenge the presidency. They're not going to nominate anybody for president. So the very hardest and most important role for a ruler of the government, the president, will not be challenged by Hamas, no matter who is nominated by Fatah. Now, of course, there is a problem within Fatah because our imprisoned leader, Marwan Barghouti, is planning to challenge for presidency, and that, I think, is the biggest problem facing Mahmoud Abbas and those who are around him who don't want to lose their being close to the president. And the third issue is that if the US or Israel doesn't want Hamas, we actually need Hamas because the new legislative council has to unite the laws between Gaza and the West Bank. And if you don't have Hamas in the room, they're not going to be they're not going to be merged into one law. And so whether we like it or not, whether the Israelis and Americans like it or not, it's actually necessary for Hamas to be in the Legislative Council and hopefully even in the National Unity Government so that we can speed up the reconciliation rather than slow it down.
So what does this mean then for Palestinians overall then, Yousef? I mean, both, regardless of who they support, is Hamas, Fatah, or anybody else. I mean, they've been waiting for, 15 years for these elections. What does this mean for them? A whole host of issues. I mean, obviously the big one is Israel and the occupation, but beyond that too, the economy, just stability within their own leadership as well.
It's to do with foreign intervention. We know that the Palestinian Authority was established and supported financially by a number of countries across the world. And the functioning of the Palestinian Authority is conditioned with the dictation that it should receive from the US administration or from a number of Arab countries who support the Palestinian Authority. So there is no Palestinian sovereignty when it comes to taking a decision that aims to unite the Palestinian people. We know that the foreign intervention, whether on part of Fatah or Hamas, has ruined the Palestinian scene. So it means that there is a bleak future for the Palestinians. It means that Palestinians will have to adapt with the status quo. It means that unless there is a real, serious Palestinian decision from within, until then, we will not see a unified front. And from time to time, we see that the Palestinians are losing hope with their own leadership. So overall, I can say that Palestinians somehow were not surprised that those elections were to be postponed. I'm one of those people. I wasn't really having high hopes that to see elections, although that it is a necessity. But let's also not forget that the Israeli side is enjoying the scene now. Palestinians were expecting that the Palestinian Authority should reward the Palestinians in Jerusalem for being steadfast, but they received a slap on their face after postponing the elections by their own president.
Daoud, before I let both of you go, I wanted to in fact ask you about the Israeli aspect in all this. The Israelis did not want these elections to happen right now, at least to the best of my knowledge. Does this essentially mean that Israel has gotten what it wants? I mean, this is essentially upheaval and I would think more mistrust as well in Palestinian leadership. Also, something which would also possibly work to the advantage of Israel?
Yeah, I think the Israelis are quite happy today. The absence of elections, the fact that the Palestinians accepted the Israeli veto is quite pleasing for them. But I think they realize that that's not the end of the story, that there are many Palestinians, including many Jerusalemites, who are going to keep fighting for their right to vote and for the right for elections to take place. So it might be a short-term victory for Israel, if you like, but the Israelis have yet to set up a government, and actually that was given as one of the reasons why the Israelis have not given a definitive answer on the issue of Jerusalem, because they don't have a government. I mean, nobody buys that, but that's at least the technical reason why they have not given a clear answer. So I think the Israelis are happy, but I wouldn't, if I was in the Israeli space, I wouldn't be happy for too long.
Well, we'll leave it there at that with Daoud and Yousef speaking to us from London and Amman, respectively. They're sharing their insight with us about this decision of the Palestinian Authority to postpone these very long-awaited elections, 15 years. Mahmoud Abbas has been ruling, essentially 10 by decree, ever since the Hamas win back in 2006. What happens next? I mean, Palestinians seemingly are quite unhappy, and we'll, of course, keep a close eye on that. We'll continue this conversation after this break. Welcome back, viewers. You're still here in Scope. We're continuing to discuss, of course, the Palestinian decision to delay the elections, the long-awaited elections, about 15 years or so. Back in 2006, as I mentioned earlier, Hamas had won elections that had been rejected at that time. That result, at least, had been rejected at the time. Mahmoud Abbas has been ruling essentially by decree, at least for the past 10 years or so. A lot of Palestinians, a lot of us, even on the outside, were waiting with bated breath for these elections, for there to finally be some form of Palestinian unity after many years of bickering. Let's discuss all of those issues, as well as, of course, the Israel factor further. We're now joined by Khalil Assali, who is a journalist, writer, publisher of Akhbar al-Balad. He is joining us today from Jerusalem. Joining us this morning from Kitchener, Ontario, in Canada, is Robert Fantina, who is an activist, journalist, and author. Robert and Khalil, thank you both for your time today. Khalil, let me start with you. Do you believe Mahmoud Abbas when he says that the reason for this postponement is simply because of the issue of voters in Jerusalem? Is it as simple as that?
That's actually what he announced, but it's so hard to find any Palestinians in Jerusalem, especially and in the West Bank, that they accept this kind of excuse. They call it an excuse, and even today, for example, some famous Palestinian figures from Jerusalem announced an article in my website, and he said that it's time to say goodbye to Abu Mazen and to have a new leadership, because what he done is anti-democratic and anti-Palestinian affairs. So actually he is make a lot of people in Jerusalem and in the West Bank very angry, and except the closest people to him from Fatah and others, nobody actually believes that this is the only excuse. Some articles that was published in the last 2 days saying that Abu Mazen was afraid that his party, Fatah, will not win the majority as it was in the last election or the election before that. So meanwhile, people who are really thought that they might win the election, they were very angry. Some people have some protests here and there. After his announcement, in Al-Aqsa Mosque after the Salat al-Taraweeh, actually, people, they run a rally inside the Aqsa Mosque and they called for resignation of Abu Mazen. So actually it's not, nobody believes that this is the only reason, especially that before, almost everybody was talking like a week ago before this announcement that he is going to delay the election, that's for sure.
Robert, what are your thoughts on this, looking from the outside in? Because this really hurts on many levels, right? A, the fact that there should be a democratic process anyways in place, which hasn't been in place for the past 15 years. And B, that this, in fact, plays into Israel's hands because the Israelis hadn't actually wanted these elections to take place anyways.
This is not the idea that the Palestinians in East Jerusalem cannot vote is only an excuse that Abbas is using because, as your other commentator said, he is afraid of losing power. Abbas dances to Israel and the United States' tune. He's a puppet on their string. He is not working for the betterment of the Palestinian people. There's much he could have done in the last 10 years and more to have helped them, and he has not done that. He is afraid that he will lose power, that his party will lose power, and Hamas will come into power. And this will be displeasing to Israel and the United States, who he has worked for all these years. The people of Palestine want these elections. There is no one under the age of 34 who has ever participated in a Palestinian election. It's long past time for them to do so. It's long past time for Abbas to cede power, to allow the people, his people, to have the democratic right and activity of a vote, and he is delaying it for his own good because he knows that he and his party will lose power if he allows these elections. The international community must step in and demand that he allow these elections to move forward.
And yeah, interesting, Khalil, hasn't it? The reaction even on the part of the U.S. I believe it was the U.S. State Department spokesperson who essentially said that it's up to Palestinians to decide when to hold elections and, you know, how their democratic process should work. I mean, it was sort of a very vague statement. Do you think that behind the scenes that the Americans are also sort of happy that these elections will be delayed? I mean, Mahmoud Abbas is, though, if we're completely honest, an old man. I mean, how much longer can he realistically be leading at this time?
Actually, because of what happened in the last election, that the United States and the European countries especially, they push hard to convince Abu Mazen, and before him was Yasser Arafat, to run for the election and to have an election. And the result was that Hamas really win in a big foul from Fatah. And then, you know, the story everybody knows in the world, what happened with how Hamas win, and they have the government and what happened after that and all this kind of issues. So it seems to me that the United States and Europe, actually, they were happy. And somehow I got some sources that told me that they are push Abu Mazen not to declare an election, even to delay the election. And because they don't want that scenario to come back again. By the way, until this moment, we don't have any Israeli reaction or any Israeli decision from any minister or from the Prime Minister office saying that we are against the Palestinian election or we are not going to allow the election happen in Jerusalem. So the only thing that we have is what Abu Mazen announced, that the Palestinian told them, because we don't have a government, so we cannot issue or accept the story of election in Jerusalem. The other thing is that everybody is happy with that situation except the people. And you said that according to the United States statement that the Palestinian people should decide. Who is the Palestinian people there who decide? Right now, there is just the Palestinian Authority that is controlling everything, and the others, I mean, in Gaza, there is Hamas controlling everything, and in the rest of the area, there is nothing. I mean, there is no, the Palestinian parties, they are not really active. The PLC, they are not active. Nothing is active except the authority. So this is really a ridiculous statement by the United States.
Robert, then we come to the bigger issue, the main issue, right? The main issue always for Palestinians is the occupation. How much does this sort of infighting, if I may use that term, it's not necessarily even infighting. I mean, I think all the people wanted these elections to take place on time anyhow, but political infighting, if I may use that term then, how does this then hurt that cause of then standing up to the occupation?
It damages it even further because Hamas has encouraged the elections. Hamas has said that Abbas must allow them to go forward, allow the people to speak. This only further disenfranchises the people of Palestine. It further erodes their rights. It entrenches the occupation because Israel and the United States know that they have a pliable so-called leader in Abbas who will do what they say, who will continue to exercise so-called security cooperation with Israel, which is just oppressive to the Palestinian people. This is further damaging to the Palestinians' cause, to their morale. They were so close to having an election, and now that's been taken from them. This only further entrenches the occupation, and that's exactly what the United States and Israel want. So they are getting what they want, again, from Abbas.
Khalil, as you've already pointed out, the people are unhappy. What exactly do you think will be the next move on their part? Because, I mean, I would think that Mahmoud Abbas knows that he is not doing something which will make him popular. How then does he expect to still have the respect of his people?
First of all, he is not so popular. That's for sure. He's not popular in the Palestinian society because there is some kind of big distance between him and the people that everybody knows in Palestinian territories. The second thing, that Palestinians believe that this election, the election for PLC, is not a political election. It's not an election against Israel. It's just election to run the life of the people in Jerusalem and in the West Bank. So it's nothing related to the Israeli-Palestinian conflict. Rather, if we are waiting for the next election, the presidential election, yes, that's really important. And after that, there is the Palestinian National Center election. That is also a very important thing. And this is related to the political issues. Now, I think what we're going to hear is more and more condemning, more and more people making demonstrations, more people calling for another kind of government and another kind of authority. I doubt that this will go more further than demonstrations and articles, because don't forget that the authority is really controlling everything in the West Bank, and Hamas is controlling everything in Gaza. And I think this is the deal that satisfied both of them, Fatah and Hamas, in the area. While the Palestinian people, the majority of the Palestinian people, or they are working inside Israel as a worker, or they are working with the authority as an employee. So I will be so surprised if something unusual happened, or Palestinian making huge demonstrations against the authority.
Robert, I'll give you the final word before I let both of you go. What do you think that happens next? I mean, is this the end of it?
I think for a time it's the end of it. As long as Abbas holds on to power, he's not going to allow elections, because that would cost him his position. He knows he is not respected. He knows that the people don't want him. He is not their leader, and yet he continues to serve as president, as leader of Palestine. However, the hypocrisy of the United States needs to be pointed out here too. It's generally when a government suspends elections, the United States will condemn that government and say it's not allowing its people a voice, that this is not democracy, and so on, so on, so on. In this case, however, the State Department is saying that it's up to the Palestinian people to make their own decisions about this. It's simply because the United States and Israel do not want any change. They want Israel to continue to be able to gain more land, to steal more land from Palestine, to further marginalize the Palestinian people and destroy them and continue with their violations of international law. Abbas is complicit in all this, and by not allowing these elections, by preventing them, he has shown clearly that he does not have the Palestinians' best interests at heart. This is a terrible thing for a leader to do. I do hope that the people of Palestine will protest against him, but they have been held down so long. They've been so oppressed. Yeah. This is just business as usual to them. Another disappointment.
Indeed. Well, we'll leave there at that, but we really appreciate both Khalil and Robert for taking their time out, speaking to us respectively from Jerusalem as well as Ontario in Canada. We were discussing, again, as we did in the first half with Daoud and Yousef, the cancellation or the postponement, at least, of these Palestinian parliamentary elections. That announced by Mahmoud Abbas, saying that he would not go forward with these elections under the guise, of course, of, in his words at least, the fact that voters in East Jerusalem would not be able to come out and vote, according to his understanding of what Israel would allow and not allow. A lot of people see that, though, as what I've said, a guise, saying that this is in fact a cover for him not wanting these elections to take place out of fear of the fact that Hamas may very well, and he's essentially ensuring that he will remain in power. He is 85 years old. He's been in power for 15 years, for 10 years, just ruling by decree. So it is high time for proper, free, democratic elections to take place throughout the Palestinian territories. That is the right, I would imagine, of every Palestinian. I'll leave it there for now. I've been Waqar Rizvi. Thanks for watching.